Hello, hello. Welcome to another weekly edition of Taxes and Retirement Live. I am Andy Panko, owner of, Tenon Financial. Thank you for joining me. Sorry, I'm a minute late here. Had a little browser issue, but I think we're all good now. So again, thank you for joining. Tonight's topic will be what to consider when deciding between taking if you have a pension, if you're lucky enough to have a pension, deciding between taking the traditional, monthly payment pension versus instead taking the lump sum in lieu of the pension. I see comments are here. Very good. Okay. Before we start, let me do the dad jokes for the evening. First, I am terrified of elevators, so I'm going to start taking steps to avoid them, like literally up the steps. Why did the girl smear peanut butter on the road? To go with the traffic jam, of course. I like strawberry jam or preserves. Honestly, I don't know if that's weird as opposed to grape, but I'm a strawberry jelly / jam kind of guy. And finally, what do prisoners use to call each other? Cell phones. Too easy. All right. The disclaimer, as usual, keep in mind this video is only general explanations and education. It is not specific tax, legal, or investment advice. Before considering acting on anything you see in this video, first consult with your tax, legal, or investment advisor, which I am not, unless, of course, we actually work together in a formal relationship. Otherwise, I am just some guy here on Facebook sharing helpful hints and education. So don't consider any of this actionable, tangible advice specific to you or your circumstances. Thank you. Okay, I'm just seeing now, quick. So there was a comment from a user in the group who's not going to be able to attend, wanted to see if I can address cash balance pension plans. I don't know if this is the same person, but yes, I will discuss this. Let me get it out of the way now, I guess. So cash balance pension, there could be some more angles to it than this, but basically traditional pension is that kind of when you leave, or eventually when you hit retirement age, assuming you're vested in that pension, you can then take your lump sum at age 60 or 65 or whatever, or take the the monthly payments at the time. You can't really touch it beforehand. A cash balance pension plan is portable. If and when you leave your employer in your 20s, 30s, 40s, what have you, you can take the present cash value of that pension with you, roll it into your new employer's 401k, roll it into an IRA. You then lose the ability to, turn on the eventual traditional pension stream down the line, but it is more portable. So my very first job out of college in 2000 was I worked for a large insurance company helping actually value. I worked in a group that helped value some of their pension plans and products that they had. And I was lucky enough to still have a pension at the time. Again, this was 2000. Most places have since stopped doing pensions. But I had a cash balance pension plan. I left that company 4 years later and just simply rolled over. It wasn't much. It was like $15,000 or something. I don't remember. Rolled that into my new employer's 401k. But fundamentally, yes, had I still worked there and ended up retiring there, or if I just let it sit there, I think I could eventually wait until I'm 60 or 65 and then turn on whatever traditional pension amount I would get, as opposed to having taken the cash balance from it. So for all intents and purposes, cash balance is just another pension for today's the sake of today's conversations. Good comment, question. Okay. I do have slides. So now for those of you who were coming here hoping to get, the answer for me to say, this is exactly when you take a pension, when you take a lump sum, you're going to be terribly let down because it's not that simple. Like most things related to retirement planning, financial planning, there's pros and cons, there's choices, there's trade-offs. What I'm going to discuss today are the main things to consider when making the decision, which one is best for you or makes more sense for you. There isn't necessarily a single right answer. And I say this all the time. I sound like a broken record, but rarely is there, an absolute, without any question, a quantifiably, this is the way to do it. Taking Social Security is one such thing where there's lots of what ifs and pros and cons. Pension versus lump sum is another big one where, it's not a simple decision. But I'll at least hopefully shed some light and value on things you should be considering when trying to make that decision. Okay, so let me pull up my slides. And I'm doing this kind of as straightforward as possible in terms of the slides. They're not super detailed. I'll be happy to take questions. At the end, like I've been doing, I'm going to run through the formal presentation, if you will, and then questions at the end. So let me pull up my screen share here. Share screen, share. Here we go. Okay. So like I mentioned, try to do this as simple and digestible as possible, simply pros and cons. Now I'm approaching this from taking the lump sum. I'm not saying that's better or worse than traditional pension, but just as a reference point, these are pros of taking a lump sum and cons of taking a lump sum. If you want to flip-flop it, it could be pros. The pro column is pros of lump sum, and the cons you can also view as pros of taking a traditional pension, if you will. So anyway, but I'm viewing it just for consistency's sake from the perspective of taking the lump sum, what's good about it, what's bad about it. Let's go. First pro. What can I see? Here we go. More flexibility, pretty straightforward, right? When you take the traditional pension option, you're going to get whatever, $3,000 a month for the rest of your life, no more, no less. Maybe you have a little bit of inflation increase, depending on the pension system you're in. You don't have any choice over how it's invested. You get what you get. Now, you may have some choice over the payment type, meaning, if you were to pass, does your spouse, if you have a spouse, get anything, or does it stop when you stop? But outside of picking, one of a few different payment types for survivor benefits, and maybe having an inflation adjustment feature, there's not going to be a lot of choices. Your pension is what it is. You take the lump sum, you can do with it whatever you please, right? You can go spend it today on a raging party. You can go roll over to an IRA, invest it, and then dribble the money out as needed throughout the years. So definitely more flexibility. The other pro, potentially, big asterisk next to this one, potentially better financial return. I should start by saying it's not a fair or valid comparison almost ever to try to compare a traditional investment product like a stock, a bond, a mutual fund versus an insurance product like an annuity, like cash value life insurance. They may have some features that look and feel kind of similar, but they're just fundamentally very different things. Insurance products of almost any sort all have some sort of inherent guarantee or backstop or minimum or something, belying them. Traditional investments do not, unless you're just parking cash in a bank, savings account where you're not going to lose anything. It is what it is. Your money will get a little bit of interest. No traditional investment has any sort of guarantee or any sort of, guaranteed income feature to it. Now, even bonds, for example, you may say, what about bonds? If a bond has a 5% coupon rate, that's guaranteed interest. It's going to show up every 6 months. Well, it is and it isn't. You'll get it until if and when the issuer defaults or otherwise, has financial difficulty or something. With insurance products or annuities or Social Security, which is functionally an annuity, the money's going to be there. Now, you may be like, yeah, whatever. Social Security could decrease, and sure, it can. Separate topic. Personal opinion, I don't think those that are on or close to Social Security are ever going to see decreases in their payments, but that's just me. Anyway, so where I'm going with this is that if you take a lump sum and invest it, sure, it's quite possible that you'll ultimately be financially better off from investing it and having it grow, assuming it grows well and it's good investments. But that's not always, there's zero guarantee with that, right? When you take a pension, the amount you're going to get every month until you die. And if you die, maybe there's something for your spouse if you're married. With the lump sum, again, if we have, like using Japan as an example, Japan's national stock market peaked in 1989, I think it was, and then had a hellacious drop. Well, guess what? It's 30 plus years later. Japan's stock market has not yet recovered to the high that it was at in the late 80s. Let that sink in. Stocks don't always go up, which is why you need to diversify. Don't invest in just one country, just one company, whatever. But, what if there's some global calamity that lasts for a decade or longer and your investment returns end up just being completely horrible going forward? In that case, in hindsight, the pension would have been the better option. But historically speaking, if invested well, chances are a lump sum properly invested could do you better than a traditional pension. But again, no guarantees. So anyway, potentially better financial return. Larger legacy. as I mentioned before, when you have a pension, there's really only two options of what happens with the payment. One is it stops when you stop, right? When you die, assuming you're the one who earned the pension. Or if you're married, there's almost always a spousal, slash survivor benefit where you can leave either 100% of the payment to the spouse, 50%, 75%, or none of it. Either way, when you and or your spouse die, that pension stops. There's no, rarely, I guess there could be, but typically there's no like insurance amount. There's no pot of money left to give to your kids, to charities, to whatever. So if you take a lump sum, again, if managed properly, you don't spend it down, whatever. When you die, presumably some of that lump sum will still be there. So if one of your main goals is to leave as much as possible to your kids, to friends, to other relatives, to charities, a lump sum may be the better option because, again, the pension stops when you stop, or if your spouse stops, if you have a spouse and take a spousal payment. And the other big and this list isn't comprehensive. I have 4 points on each side. These are sort of the big ones that I can think of. Sure, there's going to be others. I don't think I'm missing any of the major ones, but there can definitely be other things to consider. These are just kind of the big ones that you definitely need to keep in mind. The other pro of taking a lump sum is you have the opportunity for inflation protection. So many pensions, dare I say most pensions, don't have an inflation increase. Ones from federal government do, some corporate pensions do, but most, and this is going to be the trend going forward, will not have inflation adjustments for it. So if your pension today is $3,000 a month and you're 65, guess what? If you make it till 95 or 100, 35, 40 years later, 30 or 45, whatever, decades later, your pension's still going to be $3,000 a month. That may be a pretty good amount of money now, but in 30 years, assuming there's some sort of non-zero inflation, $3,000 a month may not be so much money. So with a traditional pension, if there's no inflation mechanism, you have to keep in mind that it's not going to go up over time. With a lump sum, again, lots of assumptions about being properly invested in the financial world doesn't collapse over the next few decades. It should be able, the lump sum should grow as inflation happens and asset prices increase. So those are the main pros for taking a lump sum over taking a traditional pension. Now, what are the cons of taking a lump sum? First, you simply may blow through it too fast, right? With a pension, you're going to get doled out $3,000 a month whenever, or whatever, whatever the amount may be. You're going to get it when you get it. Every month it's going to show up, no more, no less. You can't pre-spend a pension because you simply don't have the money until you get it each month. You take a lump sum, $500,000 lump sum today. If you're a spendthrift or otherwise, don't have a good set of fiscal restraint to yourself, you may end up spending a little too much too soon, which isn't great. There's investment risk with taking a lump sum. And we already sort of touched on this. With a pension, and I can see the comments here, Cody mentioned, keep in mind that an insurance product, which a pension functionally is the employer or the person, issuing the pension. They're the ones taking all the risk, right? They commit to pay you. I'm going to keep using $3,000 a month. They commit to pay you $3,000 for the rest of your life. Doesn't matter how good or how bad the financial markets do or how long you live, they're still on the hook for that. Like they're bearing all the risk of the pension, which logically, that's why so many companies are doing away with pensions, because they simply don't want the risk, can't handle the risk. It's a big albatross around their neck dealing with this risk. So one of the common themes is that there's something it's literally called risk transfer within the insurance industry, is large insurers step in and basically buy out pensions from corporate employers. The pension company then manages the investments, runs the administration of the pension, et cetera. And the company can simply, step away, and they don't have to worry about this big headache and this big risk going forward. So anyway, there's a lot of investment risk behind managing a pension, but that risk isn't on you if you take the pension. It's on the company or the insurance company behind it. But if you take the lump sum, then it's all on you in conjunction with your advisor, if you have one, to manage it, not lose it, keep it safe, yet still make it grow if you need it to grow. So anyway, there's risk with taking the lump sum for those reasons. This is a big one, and this is a large part of the decision, in my opinion. Now, it's easy, especially for quantitative-minded folks, to try to approach this decision purely as a mathematical break even, and that is definitely a good starting point. And what I mean by that is, if you are so most pensions are, the lump sum equivalent of a traditional pension is usually valued on the assumption that the person's going to live till they're like mid 80s. That's kind of the standard life expectancy. So if you're 65 and you have a traditional pension, the lump sum amount is based on the assumption that you're going to live to get about 20 years worth of payments. What's the lump sum equivalent of that? That's more or less the math behind it. And then throw in interest rates, which I'll touch on in a bit. So like if you know you're going to die in a year, then you probably don't want the pension because that's a sucker bet, right? Take the lump sum. The lump sum is assuming you're going to live 20 years. If you know you're not, take the lump sum. Where's I going with this? Stress and anxiety. Oh, right. So it's not just a numerical break even, this pension versus lump sum. That is one data point. That is an important thing to consider. And life expectancy plays into that, as I just mentioned. But you have to also weigh the emotional aspects of this in any financial decision, because there's value in peace of mind and comfort and guarantee. And to some people, that value, trumps everything else. To other people, they don't care so much about that sense of comfort and consistency and stability. They're plenty fine taking potentially lots of risk in the financial markets. So if you're the type of person that habitually worries about running out of money, even if you've been informed by multiple folks that you're fine, if you lose sleep at night when the markets drop a few percent in a day, if you find yourself always worrying about the money in the markets, then maybe the lump sum isn't right for you, because you're always going to have that, what if it drops in value? I'm not going to want to see that, especially if I'm retired and living off of it. So in that sense, getting a traditional pension where the money shows up like clockwork every month, that peace of mind could be tremendously valuable and important to you if you are that kind of person. So this is a big one to consider, and it's really hard to quantify. There's surveys and risk tolerance questionnaires and things that I do with clients to help try to put some sort of number, some sort of quantifiable metric around people's views towards risk, but still that's far from perfect. So just keep this in mind. If you're naturally a worrier and you find yourself always stressing about the markets and your finances and your future, traditional pension might make a lot more sense for you than your neighbor, for example, which, that's important as well. Groups like this, like Taxes and Retirement are great. Other groups are great. Other public forums are great. But anytime you ask something, keep in mind, you're going to get answers that are heavily influenced by people's own opinion and views and personal circumstances, right? Your neighbor, for whatever host of reasons, the lump sum may be slam dunk no brainer for your neighbor to take a lump sum. Maybe not for you, right? So if you ask your neighbor, hey, what would you do? And he's like, without a doubt, take the lump sum. That could be horrible advice for you, right? Without knowing your circumstances, your views, your emotions towards risk, maybe the pension is clearly the right answer for you. So anyway, lots of things to consider. The answer always is it depends, like almost everything that we talk about in this group. It's possible to outlive. The other con of taking a lump sum is it's possible to be outlived. Like I said, with a pension, it'll last until you die, assuming that's the payment stream you take. There's other forms of pension you can take, but the traditional pension it stops when you stop, or maybe if you select a survivor payout for your spouse, it'll live on for your spouse. So you can't outlive your pension. You can outlive a lump sum, and this all sort of ties together, whether it's because you spend it too quickly and or the investments just have a horrible run of years strung together. You can burn through a lump sum over time, whereas you can't burn through your pension. Do I have anything else here? No. Okay, I'll pause there for a second and take a quick drink before I move on. Those are the big ones, the big consideration points. And I'm back. So let's now put some financial planning behind the decision and things that I think about and I discuss with my clients when approaching this decision. So, and I give credit for those of you who haven't come across already, there's a great podcast called the Retirement and IRA Show, hosted by Jim Saulnier and Chris Stein. If you like what's discussed in this group, taxes and retirement, and if you like the sort of next level kind of technical knowledge, but still presented in a as easy as possible to understand kind of way, you'll absolutely love that podcast. The depth of content and quality of content, for as technical as it is, it's a phenomenal education. They should be charging for it. It's that good. And I have no vested interest in it. I'm a follower of that podcast and absolutely love what they do. And they and I think alike and approach things the same way. So where I'm going with this is, let's work through an example, and I'll kind of bring to light when you start to think more about, should I take the pension? I see Cody just posted up the Retirement and IRA Show. Thank you very much. Okay. So here's an example. Let's assume you sit down, you do this math yourself, or you work with a planner or whatever, and you decide that in retirement, my total expenses are going to be $60,000 a year. Just keep it simple. Of that, let's break it down. You have about 40 grand of it are going to be necessary expenses. And the reason why I referenced Retirement and IRA Show is they refer to it as your minimum dignity floor. That's their term. When I say necessary, it's not just the absolute bare minimum to keep you alive. It's not eating cans of beans every night. It's not sleeping in a tent. It's, going back to the Retirement IRA Show, the minimum dignity floor. The basics you need without living in absolute squalor, but not living lavishly either. The basics you need to have a respectable, dignified life. That's the minimum dignity floor. So that's food, transportation, housing, healthcare, and taxes, basically, right? And by food, again, it's not eating beans, but it's not eating caviar either. It's it's some reasonably priced basic kind of meals. So anyway, let's just assume of your 60,000 total expected retirement expenses, 40,000 of it are your necessary ones, your minimum dignity floor, if you will, to steal the term from Jim Saulnier. And then the other 20,000 are discretionary or fun money, things that travel, hobbies, going out to the movies, other things that if you absolutely had to cut back, you could, right? So maybe in your necessary or minimum dignity floor is some basic travel, right? Going to see your family the next state away once or twice a year, things like that. So it doesn't mean you have to cut out all travel, all hobbies, whatever, within your necessary minimum dignity floor. It just means, the minimum you need to be physically and at some level of mentally happy. The discretionary truly is kind of the fun stuff that if you absolutely had to, you can cut it out. So you have 60,000 of anticipated expenses, 40 of which are necessary, 60 of which are discretionary. Where are you going to get your income from to cover that? And this is what retirement planning / distribution planning is all about. Ideally, you would want to have your necessary expenses, your minimum dignity floor, if you will, covered by sources of guaranteed, stable, lifetime secure income. So that if your portfolio ever depletes, you'll still have some amount of money showing up every month for the rest of your life, and that amount should be keyed or close to keyed to your necessary expenses, such that they'll always be covered no matter what happens with the rest of your financial assets. So in our example, let's assume you do this math and you're going to have Social Security. So there's only 3 forms of income that are guaranteed, secure, stable, will last the rest of your life: Social Security, pensions, and annuities. Now you may say, what about dividend stocks, or what about bonds? Sort of. It's not quite the same, because dividends could always be cut, reduced, or taken away. Bonds, same thing. They can default unless it's from the U.S. Treasury, the U.S. government, which in theory is default risk-free. They've never not paid coupons to someone. I think there are days where technically they were like a day late or something, but they've never just blown up and not paid. But if you have bonds from corporate issuers or other governments, they can potentially stop paying. So those aren't guaranteed. So anyway, point is, there's only 3 sources: Social Security, pension, and annuities that are stable, secure, lifetime guaranteed income. If you're only going to have, $30,000 of Social Security, you're short another 10 grand a year of stable, secure income. Maybe you consider the pension, right? Maybe your pension is your other source of guaranteed income on top of Social Security that fills up that little bucket here, so that you have your minimum necessary expenses covered for the rest of your life. And if you don't have a pension, you probably wouldn't be listening to tonight's topic here, but if you don't have a pension, then maybe that's when you consider an annuity, because people often ask, do I need an annuity? I thought I'd fold this into this example here. My view is that annuities come at a cost. There's a guarantee because they're an insurance product. Guarantees aren't free, and they shouldn't be. So there are fees associated with annuities, and there's all different kinds of annuities, which we'll discuss. There's another weekly show lined up for that. But this is when you consider an annuity, is if you don't have enough secure, stable lifetime income to fill and match your minimum expenses, then you consider, you take the pension perhaps, or if you don't have a pension, then you start considering an annuity. Now, when you wouldn't necessarily need to consider the annuity is if your portfolio of assets is so large that you have negligible risk of depleting it. Like in this case, you only have to spend an additional, 30 grand a year of income on top of Social Security. If you have a $5 million portfolio, it doesn't matter what you do. You're not going to run out of that unless you make some really silly bets and put it all into one stock and that stock blows up. $5 million is easily going to be able to throw off 30 grand a year without batting an eye. So then it doesn't matter. You don't have to worry about this stuff. But for those that do have a portfolio that may potentially run out based on figures and projections or whatever, then you definitely want to consider, getting some sort of guaranteed income to fill up this bucket. And if it's not pension, that's when you consider an annuity. So anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to make this an annuity talk, but this was like a perfect example of when and why an annuity would be considered. And then, so let's assume you do take the pension here. So that fills up and matches off the rest of your 40 grand of necessary expenses throughout life. Then the rest of this money, you're in a good spot. Then the rest you come from investment account withdrawals. And like I said, the theory here is that if and when your portfolio depletes, not ideal, obviously, but at least you have all of your minimum expenses covered by forms of guaranteed lifetime secure income that will last as long as you do. And okay, so that's another sort of thing here. When you do the math, do the financial planning, when would you consider a pension? This example, right? When you have to fill up this bucket, that's where pension makes perfect sense. Final thought. I'm going to do a separate topic all about bond math and financial math. It's going to be real nerdy, but this is sort of this phenomena here is directly related to the math of money and how things are valued. All else equal, when interest rates go up, the value of lump sums goes down, and vice versa. When interest rates go down, the value of lump sums go up. So we are in or close to historically low interest rates. And anyone who's looked at their lump sum statements recently, or especially over the last few years, I'm sure you've noticed the lump sums have ticked up in probably pretty sizable ways as interest rates have plummeted over the last few years. Now, interest rates bottomed out, middle of last year at the height of the pandemic. They've since started coming back. So lump sums may start trickling down again over time. But chances are now, if you're looking at a lump sum today, it's probably the highest it may ever be, just because interest rates are so low. So if you're on the fence, and the reason why I added this slide at the end, in my view, these 8 things are the main considerations you should consider when taking a lump sum or a pension. These are unique to you, some of them, depending how you invest it, depending your emotional views, depending the flexibility you want or need, et cetera, depending your spending habits. These are sort of things you can kind of control. You have no control over interest rates. So I was hesitant to put this interest rate bit into my other slide before. This is sort of an afterthought. If you're on the fence about pension or lump sum, then I think it's okay to kind of use this as the tiebreaker. But if you're already leaning strongly one way versus the other, based on that other slide, I wouldn't necessarily let this interest rate noise kind of cloud your judgment. But point is, when interest rates are low, lump sums are high, and vice versa. So now, current interest rate environment, lump sums are probably the highest you'll likely ever see them. So if you're on the fence, again, I'm not saying take the lump sum, but definitely food for thought. Lump sum's probably not going to get any higher while you're alive. Okay, that is it for the slides. Okay, I'll get rid of that. Let me unshare the screen here now that this is done. Stop sharing, and I'm back full screen. Okay, I will go scroll through questions. Let me get a drink here. Let me mute first. All right, starting from the top, let's see what kind of questions we have. And for there are some people who post questions within Facebook that for some reason don't flow through to my streaming thing here. Apologies if anyone notices that happening. Please, copy and paste that person's comments into your comments. So hopefully they'll then pop up. Okay, I'm just going to start picking some stuff here. Mary Sherman, if you take a lump sum, can you pay yourself the same monthly amount as the pension offered without running out of money too soon with a reasonable investment return? When I look at the net present value of my pension, I'm 62, it seems like I'd need to leave the full lump sum amount invested for years before taking any distributions to not run out of money. Great comment. So this is why it's hard to compare, and it's almost impossible to compare accurately. Like I said, you can't compare traditional investment products where there is no guarantee. Yes, they can and may very well end up growing more and being able to produce for you more money, more return, but maybe they won't. So it's really not apples to apples to compare a fixed, guaranteed, no variability payment like a pension to a lump sum that's invested and distributed from. For what it's worth, if you were to, what am I trying to say? For a given amount of lump sum, the pension you'd be able to get instead of that lump sum is almost always higher than the payout you'd be able to get if you were to take that lump sum and go buy a private annuity from an insurance company. I've yet to see a pension where the pension payout was worse or even with what you'd be able to get by buying an annuity yourself. For example, let's here's a good site. Let me bring this up. Let me share with you something here just to give you some context. Where is it? That's not it. It's not going to work. Never mind. Sorry. There's a website called immediateannuities.com. I'm not promoting it. It's a guy who sells annuities, runs it. But what I like about it is you don't have to put in any of your information. I absolutely hate sales and being sold and people chasing me with follow-ups to try to sell me things. Immediate Annuities, you don't have to put your name, you have to put your phone number, your email, nothing. So they don't chase you at all. It's a website where you can put in your age, the amount of money that you want to buy an annuity with, what state you live in, what type of payment you want. And it'll give you free quotes right there. There's no hassle. There's no personal info. Like I said, you can simply close the website, walk away. No one's going to follow you up and be like, hey, want to buy an annuity? That's why I use it. That's why I like it. Outside of that, I'm not, recommending it or saying, go use it, go buy an annuity there. But point is, I played around some numbers before this live. And for a 65-year-old female to take $100,000 and buy an annuity that'll last the rest of her life, the annual payment she'll get will be about 5.5%, if I remember correctly, thereabouts, give or take a little bit. It was low 5%, I think, 5.4 perhaps, for $100,000 or for any amount of money, doesn't matter. If you instead had a pension with $100,000 lump sum, the amount of annual payments you'd get from it would certainly be higher than that 5.5% that you can get if you were to buy an annuity on your own. So what I'm trying to say is, if you do think you want or need the guarantee and stability of a consistent monthly payment, taking the pension is almost certainly going to produce for you a higher payment than taking the lump sum and going and buying an annuity on your own. Anyway, but can you invest a lump sum and do better? It's possible, but there's no guarantees, and therefore you got to stop the comparison right there, because you can't compare something with a guarantee to something with a not. It's just not the same playing field. So great question, but I would not want to take a lump sum and think I could take out 6, 7, 8% per year for the rest of my life. That's probably that says, historically speaking, for a given amount of money invested, you can pull out 4% of it in the first year and then take out a little more every year for inflation. And if invested in about half stocks, half bonds, chances are, statistically speaking, you're not going to run out of portfolio. But that's only 4%, right? Most pensions are going to pay out 6, 7, 8%, if not more. I've seen one that was like 13% recently, which is crazy. You can't pull out 7, 8, 9, 10% per year from your portfolio. It's just you're almost certainly going to burn through it before you die. So I think that sort of answers your question, but really it all depends, and only time will tell because you're comparing a guarantee versus not a guarantee. Mary, sorry, I kind of rambled on about that one. I don't know what this means. Blueberry, cool. Okay, what is this? I've already made this choice, but the other factor I consider is taxes. I felt this is a con of the lump sum, as it puts one in a higher bracket, plus immediately reduces your investable assets. I think I saw someone else reply to this. Yeah, here we go. So this is probably it. So no, if you have a traditional lump sum, even if it's all pre-tax money, you're not taxed when you take the lump sum out. You may be. There's two options when you take a lump sum. You can roll it into a traditional IRA. There's no tax due upon the rollover. You can then reinvest it in the IRA however you want. And then, like any other IRA, you're only taxed when you take money out on the amount you take out at the time. So in that case, no, the lump sum is in no way bumping up your tax bracket or anything like that. If you take the lump sum just straight up, you don't roll to an IRA, you're just like, yeah, pay me, then yes, that entire lump sum is a taxable distribution in the year you take it. That's when you get slapped really hard with taxes. But generally speaking, when you take a lump sum, you just roll it into an IRA and then distribute money out throughout the years as you need it. But yeah, that's a good question. When you take it, make sure you roll it. Don't just dump it out into your checking account, because you will have a big, fat, nasty tax bill. Yes, so that's what this person here is saying. Okay, what is right? Is that it already? Looks like that's it. Wow, only one other question. Wild. Todd Watson, what happens if a pension is underfunded or runs out of money? Yeah, great question. And that may potentially be a concern or a reason to lean away from taking the pension option. But here's how it works. If it's a private pension, so not a government, not a municipality, but it's a private company that has the pension, they, most if not all time, I think let's assume every case, especially if it's a larger company, they need to pay into a national pension insurance system called the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, or PBGC. Just like the banks have FDIC insurance, if a bank goes under, the FDIC steps in and guarantees up to, what is it, 250 grand per account holder. The PBGC, if a company blows up and its pension is insolvent, the PBGC steps in and makes people mostly whole. You don't always get 100 cents on the dollar, but you're not going to walk away with like 10 cents on the dollar. Meaning if your pension was $1,000 a month, it's not going to drop to like $100 a month. You know, maybe the ding is down to like, I don't know, 800, 900, something like that. I don't know. I forget the exact statistics, but you may have some reduction, but it's not going to like, deplete all the way down to nothing. That's if it's a private employer. And to further complicate it, within the private employer PBGC world, there's two different types of pension. There's single employers, and then there's, I'll call it multi-employer. I don't know if that's the right term. Single employers, like, I'm going to make this up. You work for AT&T. It has its own pension. It's its single employer. You don't share that plan with any other companies. Single employer pensions are funded. The PBGC system is pretty well funded for single employer plans, such that if you have a single employer pension, I don't think you have to worry much about that company eventually blowing up, because the PBGC pot of money behind single employer pensions is pretty sizable. Where there is some strain, or there was as of a handful of months ago when I last looked, is those multi-employer pensions. An example of which is like if you work for a union, you're a carpenter. You may work for a relatively small local carpentry place. That carpentry company doesn't have its own pension. Instead, it and dozens of other local carpenter companies are all part of a union pension, such that all the employees are their pension systems through the union, not through the employer. That's a multi-employer pension, or whatever the technical term is. The PBGC pot of money behind multi-employer pensions is a little less. It's a little more strained. So I don't think it's to the point where you're at risk of like your multi-employer pension possibly going to zero or close to it. But there is some more risk to if and when that pension system has trouble, you may end up getting more of a haircut, more of a reduction on your pension going forward. So that is something to consider. For municipalities, definitely, things to be concerned about depending on the state or the municipality behind your pension. Last I looked was probably better part of a year ago. I think it was New Jersey, where I live, its state pension was the 49th worst funded out of the whole country. I believe Illinois may have been the worst. I don't think those figures are drastically different now. So if you are a public employee of New Jersey or Illinois or any other state that's in like the lower, the bottom part of the fundedness of their pension system, that should be a legitimate concern. Something's got to give at some point. Now, you may get lucky, and it may not be while you're alive. It may not be till decades down the road. But simply put, like pension systems that are that strained, something's got to break at some point. Whether people start paying a lot more in or recipients, pensioners start getting less out, something's got to give. So that's a consideration, yes, if you work for a municipality or something that has a strained pension system. So great question. Those are other things to think about, is the fundedness of the pension. What is this that Cody's saying? You can actually have more control over taxes if your lump sum is rolled into an IRA, especially if you have tax efficient distribution strategy. Yay, planning. Yeah, so where Cody's going with that is when you get a pension, you have no control, which is one of the upsides, right? The money is what it is. You get $3,000 every month, period, boom, done. Well, that $3,000 is always taxable, right? So that's $36,000 a year at a minimum of taxable income. Your taxable income's never going to, or gross income, your gross income's never going to be lower than that $36,000 a year once you start your pension. Whereas if you roll it into an IRA, you can control how much you take and when and why. The downside is once you hit 72 and need to start taking required minimum distributions, then you lose some control over it because you're forced to have to take out a certain amount. But otherwise, like Cody said, you can argue that you actually have more control over taxes with a lump sum as opposed to a pension. Can you roll over into an IRA even if your company contributes to your company's 401k? Not entirely sure what you're asking, but yes. I guess the question is, if you have a lump sum you're able to take in lieu of taking the pension, can you roll that lump sum into an IRA even if your company contributes on your behalf to your 401k? The answer should be yes. I mean, I guess some companies may put restrictions on it, but generally speaking, the pension / lump sum thing and decision should be separate and unrelated from the 401k decision. What you choose to do or not do with your lump sum shouldn't matter with regards to what you do with your 401k and vice versa. Connecticut's pretty bad as well. Yeah, I assume that's regarding the pensions. Yeah. I think New York's not hot either. It doesn't bode well for the Northeast. But yes, I shared an article in the group. I want to say it was about a year ago, that actually ranked the top 50 best to worst fundedness of state pensions. And Wisconsin was number 1 at the time. I don't know where it is now. And I think Illinois was 50, New Jersey was 49, and then there's some other losers down there with us. How is a lump sum related to a pension generally calculated? Total contributions from employees and employers to the program. Yeah, good question. I mean, each plan can be a little different, but I think you're looking at it backwards. The pension amount is what's based on contributions in and/or years of service and/or typically the common structure is like your pension will be based on your last 3 years of wages, or the average of your last 3, or the highest of your last 3 or something, multiplied by your years of service, multiplied by some percentage or whatever, by 2% or something typically. So in that sense, your pension is based on contribution, years of service, salary, whatever. The lump sum is a byproduct of what your pension payments would be. There's could be more to it than this, but basically it's what would your monthly payment be? What's your life expectancy? So if you start if you're 60 years old, you can start your pension today. The assumption is you're going to have approximately 22 to 25 years of payments is the assumption, meaning you live till, early to mid 80s. And then the other big one, what are interest rates? Remember that slide, the last slide I showed. Interest rates are definitely a defining factor to how much the lump sum is. And this is because of the math behind how you value a stream of future income payments. Beyond the scope of tonight's topic, but all else equal, the higher interest rates are, the lower the lump sum is going to be, and vice versa. So basically you project out, okay, I'm 60, I'm going to have 25 years of payments. Let me now, it's called discounting, let me figure out what the present day amount is of each of those 25 years of payments. Just sum up all those present amounts. That's the lump sum. It really is almost that simple, the math behind it. So hopefully I answered your question, kind of a convoluted answer, but the point is the lump sum isn't determined by those things you mentioned. It's the pension payment is. The lump sum is just simply basic financial math to equate those pension payments to a single present day dollar amount. If the company goes out of business before you start your pension, you're just out of luck, right? Think GM, Madoff. I would not. No, I wouldn't put Madoff and GM in the same bucket. Madoff was just outright fraud, in every sense of the word. False statements, just a sham of a company. He did have legitimate business, but that shouldn't overshadow the fact that he was an absolute scoundrel and just, fraudulent. I'll leave it there. GM isn't fraudulent. GM just, whether it was bad business decisions, whether it was a market, whether it was just decades of kind of fat and lazy complacency. Sorry, not to knock anyone who worked at GM, but no. So if you worked at GM's pension, because it's a private employer, its pension is part of the PBGC insurance, national insurance system, like I said. So no, I don't think, I could be wrong. I don't think GM employees got completely skunked on their pensions in 2008 when GM had to declare bankruptcy. I think it was 2008. Now, I don't remember and I didn't follow too closely, but I think GM did probably restructure its pension as part of its bankruptcy arrangement. Simply put, GM wasn't viable; it was insolvent, right? Partly because of the operations or its lack or poor operations, but partly also because of its pension. Like I mentioned before, big companies with these big legacy pensions, that's a tremendous burden around their neck that does legitimately drag down these companies, which is why they want to shut them off as quick as they can. So I do believe GM pensioners had their pensions restructured to some extent, but I don't think any of them just flat out lost their pension as a result of GM's bankruptcy, partly because of the PBGC insurance system, I think. But Madoff, yeah, if you just work for a sham of a company that's fake in every sense of the word, then yes, maybe you never had a pension in the first place, right? The statements you got as an employee saying you had a pension, guess what? Maybe there was never anything there to start with. That's Madoff. That wasn't the case with GM. Good observation, though. A fun fact, this was around 08, 09. I remember reading an article in the Wall Street Journal, or maybe it was even earlier. It was probably earlier, just to really hit home how big of a financial burden these pensions are. This was about Ford in particular at the time. But the gist was the same between Ford, GM, and Chrysler. It was something silly, like for every car Ford sold that year, I want to say it was like $2,000 right off the top went to pay for pensioners, went to pay pensions of people who had retired. Think about that, right? Whether you're selling a $20,000 Ford Escort at the time, or what's $30,000 Ford Taurus, 10 years ago, whatever, 15 years ago, $2,000 of every car went to just pay pensioners. That's a serious obligation. You can see why these companies got in trouble with these pensions, and it's not their fault, part of its demographics, right? No one foresaw decades ago when pensions were popular, people were going to live so long, that financial markets were going to struggle, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't know. I'm kind of wasting time getting off on a rant here, but it was interesting. It was seriously a couple $1,000, I want to say, of every car sold went to having to pay pensions. That's not even paying for lights. That's not paying for material. It's just paying pensioners. That blew my mind when I read that. My work doesn't offer lump sum, so easy decision. Yes. Now to decide sole 50% or 100% survivorship. LOL. There you go. You don't have to worry about this then, other than the spousal benefit. Okay. Ooh, what is this? Cody Garrett. Andy, can you describe joint and survivor and period certain pension options? Yes, I would love to. So this is insurance and annuity speak. As I mentioned before, there are different payment options you can take with an annuity or with a pension. And a pension is really nothing more than an annuity in its function. Joint and survivor means that the pension will last. If you are the one with the pension or the annuity, it'll last as long as you die. If and when you die and you have a spouse, then something will continue on for a spouse. Maybe you choose that 100% of the payment continues on. Maybe you choose 75%, maybe 50%, maybe 0. But that's joint and survivor. The payment will last as long as one of you two are still alive. Again, it's just for spouses. I don't know. I've never seen a pension or annuity where you can name some other random person as your, the other annuitant, if you will. Period certain is so the risk and what people are hesitant, or why one of the reasons people are hesitant to buy traditional annuities is that you fork over a lump sum of money, a couple $100,000 in return for $1,000 a month of payment for the rest of your life. If you live till 110, awesome. You beat the insurance company, you won, or you beat the pension, you won. If you die the next day, sorry, you got skunked. Bad deal. Now, people don't like that. And so there's another payment type you can choose called period certain. And that says, even if I die tomorrow, this payment will last at least for some certain amount of period. Typically, it's like 10 years. Sometimes it's 5. You can pick and choose. So whether you live 1 day or 4 years, let's say, your payments will last for at least 5 years if you pick a 5-year period certain, or they'll last for at least 10 years if you pick a 10-year period certain. And with those period certains, if you do die before the period's up, the remainder of those payments then go to whatever beneficiary you designate. Could be a spouse, could be a child, could be whatever, it doesn't matter. Sounds great, but like any insurance product and any additional guarantee, it comes at a price. So the highest form of payment you'll get, whether it's a traditional pension you're selecting or an annuity, is what's called single life or life only. That is, you get the payment till you die. Once you die, payment's over, done, right? If you take one of these joint survivor options like Cody mentioned, the payment will be a little lower because now it'll last not just when you die, but when someone else dies. If you take a period certain, it may be lower, maybe higher, depending how old you are. Like if you're 98 and you take a 10-year period certain, you're probably going to die within 10 years anyway. So the insurance company isn't going to ding you very much for taking that 10-year guarantee. I take that back. No, I said that backwards. They will definitely ding you because you're almost certain to die within those 10 years. So therefore, they're going to have to pay this out for 10 years. If you're only 50 years old and you take a 10-year period certain payout, there's probably not going to be much difference, if any, to your payment because, chances are you're going to live at least 10 years anyway if you're only 50. So the insurance company isn't taking on that much more risk by guaranteeing 10 years. All right. Good question, Cody. Oh, my nose is stuffy for some reason. If I take a pension instead of a lump sum, which in my case will cover most of my living expenses, I feel like I could have a much higher percent of stock investments in my 401k since I'll have my living expenses covered. Does this make sense? Absolutely. And this is one, oh man, great comment. This is one of the reasons why you have to completely disregard rules of thumb about how much money do I need to retire. Because those surveys, those quizzes, those rules of thumb often don't take into account how much other income are you going to have. For example, if your total expenses in retirement are only anticipated to be $50,000, just pick a number, and you're going to have 40 grand of Social Security and 20 grand of pension, you're already going to right off the bat, you're going to have $10,000 more of income every month than you need from guaranteed lifetime sources of pension and Social Security. So you're already banking you're saving $10,000 a year, right? In that case, in theory, you can have no other investable assets and you're fine. So you can make an argument that you need zero money to retire in that case because of your pension and Social Security. With that said, any money you do have, you can do whatever you want with it. You can be super conservative, just let it sit in a shoebox. Well, not good in case your house burns down, but let it sit in the bank. It doesn't need to grow because you don't really need it to live on. Now, separate story if you have this big expense or you want to do lots of big trips or something, or leave a huge legacy to someone, then you need to make that grow. But otherwise, if it's just for you, you don't need it. It doesn't matter what you do with it. It can sit there and not grow, or you can go real nuts with taking risk, plop it all in cryptocurrencies or stocks or whatever. Even if it goes to zero, so what? You'll be okay because of your pension and Social Security covers more than what you need day to day. So great comment. And yes, your comment makes 100% sense. What makes it difficult is you can go one of two ways. You can go uber conservative with your investments because you don't need the growth, or you can go uber risky because why not, right? Even if it goes to zero, so what? You're still okay. So why not shoot for the stars and just to try to make it grow as much as possible to leave to whoever. Great comment. And yeah, that flies in the face of all those. You need $1 million by the time you're 50 to retire. No, maybe you don't. If you got a healthy pension and Social Security, that might be all you need. Anyway, great comment. Thank you for that. Do you think that the return assumptions that companies are using are accurate given where the bond and stock market currently is? I assume you mean the return assumptions with regards to pension plans and how much the plans are anticipated to grow. I think I haven't looked at a pension plan in detail in a while, but I think they typically assume 6-ish, maybe 7% growth, somewhere 5 to 7, let's say. I think that's fair. Now, again, I don't have a crystal ball, and making investment projections is always dicey. So let me say that I have no guarantees about any of this. But yeah, pension plans, because they're such long-term vehicles, pensions last for decades. They can take some more risk. I'm not saying 100% of it's in stocks, definitely not, but they could have a pretty chunky portion of their investable assets in longer term growth assets because the plan will be around 30, 40, 50 years. With that said, I don't think a 5 to 7% growth assumption is unreasonable. Anything less than 5 is probably too conservative. More than 7 is probably too aggressive. But yeah, even with bonds in there, and I don't know that bonds are going to do much going forward because rates are so low. Bonds should still, on average, do some non-zero amount of return, whether it's 1% or 3% per year to be expected. I don't know, but add that on top of reasonable stock market expectations. I don't think it's out of the picture, to assume anywhere from 6 to 8% nominal stock market returns per year going forward. So yeah, so 5, 6, 7%, 8%. 8's for a job. 5, 6, 7% pension assumption, I think is fair. I was told the interest rate has to increase because my lump sum went over $100,000. Any chance of my lump sum coming back? Wondering how much the interest has to change, or am I out of luck for lump sum? I'll still get the monthly amount because Novartis isn't going bankrupt. I can start taking monthly next year, or wait, no spouse. I'm not entirely sure what you're asking here. You were told the rate has to increase because your lump sum went over 100. I don't know the question here. Sorry. Maybe you can rephrase that perhaps. Sorry about that. Actuaries are pretty smart, wicked smart. Yeah. So actuaries, for those who don't know, and that was my first job out of college, was at an insurance company doing the actuarial valuation of pension plans. Actuaries are the math folks that work at insurance companies, and they're the ones who do the number crunching to figure out when people are likely to die. They literally produce tables, and they update these tables. I forget how frequently, once every 10 years or so, I want to say. based on revised demographics and whatever. And there's literally a table that says for any given year of life, you have here's the chance of you dying this year. It's pretty cool, but pretty morbid stuff to look at. And when I started working, I forget the year of the table, but statistically speaking, when you hit 114, you had a 100% chance of dying in that year. Up until your 114th year, you still had some chance statistically that you were going to live another year, but at 114, boom, you're done. As far as insurance companies would view you. But anyway, yeah, actuaries are the ones who figure this out, and they're really good at it. You're not going to beat actuaries when it comes to handicapping, life expectancies. Now, actuaries and insurance companies work on the law of large numbers, right? They pool together these risks across hundreds and thousands, like life insurance, for example. They don't sell life insurance to just you. If you die tomorrow, they lose out because they got to pay you a big fat lump sum of money. They pool you together with hundreds and thousands of other people. There will be people who die prematurely. There's going to be people who live really long, but it averages out such that they have really good statistical data that says, as a whole, this pool of people, we know with very high certainty at least, that the average age of death is X. So this is how we price and value our products, assuming on average all these people die at X. And those are actuaries. Real wild bunch too, actuaries. When both die and nobody knows for a while, what happens to the surplus pension payment? Someone has to pay it back later. That's a good one. I don't know. I haven't directly been involved in that. I would assume so. The estate is probably responsible for it. So this is my guess. Whoever the executor or executrix is of someone's estate, they need to blast out to the world when the person dies, hey, so-and-so died. To anyone out there that has a debt claim against this person, speak now or forever hold your peace. I think all those claimants then have to come forward and be like, hey, I paid 3 extra months of pension to so-and-so who died. Let me get that money back. My guess is that's how it works. And then the estate would have to pay back those few months of pension. Good question. But often not good financial advisors, too fact-based. I assume you're talking about actuaries, Mary? And I agree with that. Anyone who's too numbers focused, who gets too stuck on thinking this whole financial retirement planning world is all about numbers and facts and figures are mistaking themselves. Facts and figures are important. You have to do the projections. You have to, that's the starting point. But things will change. There's no guarantees. There's no certainty. Financial planning, retirement planning would be really easy if you knew with certainty when you're going to die, if you knew what the financial markets were going to do every year, if you knew exactly how much you had to spend every year, if you knew exactly when tax legislation would change and how, this job will be simple. But we don't know any of these things. So we have to make educated guesses, kind of plan for reasonable expectations, but realize things will change, right? So don't get too hung up on trying to nail down mathematical certainties about all this planning stuff, because we're projecting out decades and stuff's going to happen. All right, I'm rambling now. Let me try to tighten this up a little bit. Yep, good. I was given the option of taking a combination pension, lump sum, and monthly, or just a monthly. How to calculate what option is best? Oh man, yeah. Without knowing your whole financial picture and your goals and wants and needs and other sources of income and expenses, it's impossible to say. But maybe some combination of lump sum and pension is right for you. At one extreme, if you want to offload all the risk, all the worry, all the uncertainty onto your company, then you would consider taking just the full pension, no lump sum. If you want to, I don't want to say gamble, but if you think you can maybe do a little better with some of the lump sum, but you don't want to take all lump sum, you still want some pension, then you take a mix. This is one of those things where there isn't going to be a single right answer. It's trade-offs, it's pros and cons. You kind of have to pick and choose what kind of feels right and run with it. But without, again, knowing all your stuff in detail, can't say how to calculate or figure out what exactly is the right way. Yeah, I would assume so. So, right. So people in Japan, for example, live longer. So wondering if their life expectancy tables, actuarial tables are different, and are there pension plans? Yeah, I would assume so. So like when I worked at, I won't name it, but look it up on LinkedIn if you want to find out, the large insurance company, for 4 years out of college, the actuarial tables we used were for US. There's one for males, one for females, but it was US because there very much are differences across countries, across cultures, across gender, obviously, like I mentioned. So there will be different plans, different tables, and different demographic sets. Hello, Mavis. Companies provide a very helpful relative value document that allows employees to compare the pension payment options. Yes, relative value meaning like different lump sums. I mean, no, probably not. But yeah, there are companies will give you usually a summary, table form. Here's your 5 payment options. Your life only, life plus 100% to spouse, life plus 50% to spouse. Some have, if you pick a spousal one, but your spouse dies before you, your payment steps back up. So yeah, they'll provide those options. I haven't seen it called relative value table, but yeah, I guess could be labeled whatever the company chooses to label it. All right, looks like we're getting to the end here. Cody Garrett, or a great opportunity to take some awesome trips and make some charities very happy. Okay, sure. And finally, last one, with interest rates so low, lump sum payments will likely be at their maximum values for people nearing retirement. Should one consider retirement now before interest rate increase, causing your lump sum to decline in the future? Perhaps. Yeah, this was that last slide I had showed. Let me just pull this up real quick, share screen, blah, blah. Share. So exactly. Yep. All else equal, the higher the interest rates are, the lower the lump sum will be, and vice versa. Now, given the macroeconomic environment, we are in a historically low interest rate environment. Therefore, lump sums today are probably the lowest anyone will ever see them, because rates, if anything, will likely go up, not down. Therefore, lump sums will likely go down, not up going forward. So if you are on the fence about lump sum or pension, maybe yes, maybe current interest rate environment does push you over and lead you to take the lump sum, because lump sums will be high, all else equal, because of lower interest rates. But I wouldn't let the interest rate thing alone make your decision. I would, if you were here for the beginning of the presentation, there's 8 other factors I talked about. In my view, those are more important than the happenstance of what interest rates are at the moment. But nonetheless, interest rates are something to consider. Okay, we will wrap it here. Thank you all. Next week's topic should be a good one. Kerry Peabody. He is a long-term care insurance expert. Will be coming on as a guest to talk all about long-term care insurance. I do not know him personally. I'm acquaintances with him through the Financial Planning Association. We sort of met online. Seems like a sharp guy, knows his stuff, has been selling long-term care for a while. So hopefully a lot of good insight to be had from Kerry next week. Definitely want to be here for that one. Otherwise, thank you all again for joining and for your support. As you saw in the group today, by this time next week, we should be at 10,000 members, which is absolutely nuts. I never would have thought that would have happened within a year, but glad to see this group is resonating with folks. All right, I'll stop it there. Thank you all. Have a good week. Good night.